two key tests to show where the variations were. For public media, we found that in the case of stocks and equities, there was a significantly higher rating for those types of media within those trading categories. For market information, that was significantly higher in the areas of stocks and bonds compared with currencies and derivatives. And what you might argue there is that the embeddedness of stocks and bonds in the so-called real economy was possibly more pronounced than in the case of currencies and derivatives. I mean, after all, companies are selling things. You know, bonds are often dealing with government debt and company borrowings for investments. So there's the suggestion here that the tangibility of the real economy comes through in the case of bonds and stocks in a way that doesn't come through in currencies and derivatives. So it's not conclusive, but it's certainly supportive of the idea that certain types of financial instrument, particularly the more abstract derivatives markets, are arguably more abstract and disconnected from the so-called real economy. So the correlations between public media and reflexive information, institutional media and reflexive information, suggest they have discrete functions. The interview data incidentally confirmed by and large that those institutional networks are critical in discerning what we might call flows. And flows here are actually the anticipation of major movements in the market by figuring out what trades are coming into the system, knowing that a big bank's doing a merger or a takeover, and knowing that there's going to be big capital flows coming through the market that will affect prices. And the other thing that came through very clearly was, again, that they're using those institutional networks to negotiate and to confirm and verify the frames that are being used in trading. So again, that's where you find out that the buzzword of today is American payroll figures, and next week it's something else. So that kind of meta information is really, really important. And so the reflexive information usage is related to those frames and flows. Okay, and that's where I think there's a potential, certainly in periods of crisis or turmoil or just changes in the market cycle, for there to be an emergent self-referentiality. You know, that's where there's, I think, a potential for autopoiesis. The other implication here is that non-institutional investors shouldn't assume, of course, that just because they've got access to a lot more financial information, they can now compete with Deutsche Bank and other major investment firms. You know, the very clear evidence was they can't. So potentially something that can happen here is that there's a nexus between traders and analysts and traders, where the traders clearly talk to the analysts, find out what's going on in the market and confirming that their trades are going in the right direction. Both of those parties talk to journalists who phone them up. And I suspect, not all the time, but during times of either crisis or during periods of market cycle change, there's probably an intensification of monitoring about what other people are thinking. And I think potentially you can get a convergence of these self-referential checks and balances of people phoning each other up and looking what the other guys are doing in the market that can arguably start triggering price movements and trading activity completely separately from the standard fundamentals. And that's where I think the markets possibly go into a phase of autopoiesis. So there's several issues of significance here, and I think it underlines the contingent and constructed nature of financial fundamentals. They're not givens, they're subject to revision, and even though there are maybe core ones that are always there in the background, they're augmented and supplemented by a whole range of other factors that you can't predict sitting at home. You've got to be in the network to figure them out. I think that the findings show the potential for the financial system to become autopoietic, and in that case, to actually evolve the criteria by which the financial markets judge their own activities. They actually evolve the criteria that drive their own activities. So in that case, current market values can become decoupled from objective external reference, particularly where market cycles are in change. And I think it arguably explains, I haven't gone into Minsky today, but it explains the periodic financial tendency towards self-referentiality and bubbles and crashes as we've just experienced. So to put this in political economic context, the credit crunch has had enormous ramifications for governments, for civil society, and the industrial economy. the state bailouts of the banking sector have seen governments go trillions of dollars into debt with massive borrowing, mainly in the form of currency bonds, that had actually been issued, and bought up by the financial sector that was being rescued. And those trillions of dollars for the bailout were issued as private credit by the very banking sector which has been rescued. So now the financial sector is putting pressure on governments. I mean, if you've been reading the news, you'll see that the UK has just had a major slash of public spending. It goes beyond the days of Rogernomics in New Zealand. And it's in response to the fact that they're now heavily, heavily in debt to the banks that they rescued. So the financial system's tendency, I think, for autopoietic insulation from other social systems is revealed. I mean, the financial system's perpetual imperative to optimize fictitious values and maintain accumulation simply rides roughshod over other social systems, and we're seeing it happening now. And I would argue, though, in this case, that it's not a complete floating sphere that's disconnected from the rest of the world. In fact, if it were, that wouldn't particularly affect us. The problem is that its autopoietic tendency is expressed through what I would call reciprocal, non-reciprocal embeddedness. So in other words, it is connected to the rest of the world, but in one direction. We have to take notice of the financial markets. The financial markets don't take notice of us. So I'll leave with John Keynes and the quotes that he made in 1936. He says, "Speculators may do no harm as bubbles on a steady stream of enterprise, but the situation is serious when enterprise becomes the bubble on a whirlpool of speculation. When the capital development of a country becomes a byproduct of the activities of a casino, the job is likely to be ill done." Thank you very much. Questions, tomatoes, abuse from neoliberals?
Should we keep the money under the mattress?
Well, the Keynes wouldn't say so, that's hoarding.
So does this mean, Peter, there's likely to be more bull and bear markets in the future as what you have been talking about, as the influence of the media continues? It's not going to stop at any point, is it?
No, I don't see the media causing this.
No,
the media
they
play a key role in amplifying those cycles.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah, it absolutely is intrinsic. And this was Minsky's hypothesis. It's also why Minsky never got the same level of academic accolades as Friedman. Politically, what he was saying wasn't popular. Friedman said inefficiencies come from external interventions through government regulation. Minsky said no, it's intrinsic to the markets themselves. The seeds of its own overreactions and intoxication and its own euphoria are actually endemic to the markets themselves. It's how they work. You can't excise that from capitalism. And that was an uncomfortable message for the new right. They didn't want to listen. Minsky died a few years ago, which is a shame, because I'm sure he would have liked to have been proved right. Although he would have spent the rest of his career, I'm sure, saying, "I told you so."
How fascinating that his opinion wasn't popular, and therefore wasn't heard.
Yeah. Although interestingly, the financial analysts I talked to, they knew who Minsky was.
Oh, right.
It's the policymakers that didn't.
And what was their opinion?
Oh, they took the guy seriously. They're not interested in ideas. I mean, it's interesting, although that most of them have a fairly conservative right-wing view of the world, they're not interested in ideology. They're interested in how the markets work. So they're empiricists. They're not ideologues. And so if this guy was showing that there's a process there that's in the markets, you better take notice of it.
And they knew themselves,
they knew.
Other places there, as you say, that they're doing it themselves. They know,
Yeah, but it just because they understand the process doesn't mean you can spot when it's happening. And the very nature of financial cycles and euphoria is that you overextend your leverage and your exposure to risk, precisely because everything is going well and you're getting positive feedback. And so the signals that should be there saying, "Whoops, you're going a bit too far here," are never there at the moment that you go too far. So you're always late. And the credit crunch was a perfect example of a Minsky cycle.
So there is no way of predicting or
not absolutely. I mean, everyone says, "Oh yeah, I told you that was going to happen." Very, very few people put the money on it at the right moment. I mean, that's the holy grail. And you know, if I knew that, well, you know, I don't suppose I'd be here. I'd be sitting on a beach somewhere. You know, it's you know, the trouble is that, and this comes through the Basel III Accord. The assumption that a lot of policymakers make is that if only there was more information, oh, we didn't know enough about those collateralised debt obligations. If only they'd told us more about it, this wouldn't have happened. Well, they always say that. And the idea that you can make the markets more transparent, that if only there was more divulgence of information, if only we just had more data more quickly, that this wouldn't happen. And I think that's answering the wrong question. It's the wrong problem, in fact. You know, because by the very nature, you know, people will model what's going on in the market, and as I said at the beginning, as they model it, you know, people will reflexively incorporate their understandings of their own behaviour into the models, at which point the models will cease to correlate with the behaviour that they're ostensibly, you know, referring to. So there's always scope to be taken by surprise. By definition, you know, the surprises and crises come precisely in those moments on something that you thought was absolutely concrete, no risk. You know, so all those systems of risk management, you know, only deal with the risk that's perceived. They can't, by definition, deal with the risks that haven't been noticed.
So if risk is inevitable, you just need good risk communication, crisis communication,
well, yes.
communicators to deal with it.
Oh yeah,
you need a new system.
Absolutely.
You're really reinforcing chaos theory and complexity theory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we put Minsky and Kondratiev into this,
yeah,
then the whole system is flawed, and it's flawed because it has no base.
Yeah.
There's no law-like statement. There's nothing there, and I object to you calling neoliberals positivists because they're not.
Oh no, I call them ideologues. But the neoclassical model of communication.
Oh yes, that might be.
You know, it tends to be positivistic. You know, it's communications automatic. You know, there's just a real world out there. It's the mirror model of news. The idea that there's a real world and you just reflect it. And if you didn't get the right message, it's because either you were inaccurate or because you didn't provide enough information. So more is better. Well, actually, what my model of reflexivity kind of blows that idea that the real world is out there and the communication about it is here, out of the water. You can't separate them.
I think you've got